Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to RTC 2021 studio here at Nagaro. We had a short stretching session, which I tend to believe that helped us all. And now we are moving on with our schedule. Simon and Rhian, two cryptocurrency experts. Simon joining us as a CTO, while Rhian, she's an author and a software consultant for startups and companies in the blockchain and crypto business. Am I right, guys?
Correct.
Yes, correct.
Yep.
Great. They will talk about their perception of the current tech and testing landscape and put forward the argument that there has never been a more exciting time to work in the industry as long as you are prepared to embrace change and keep clearly an open mind. Is this a good topic to talk in the 10th anniversary of RTC, guys?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you think about how technology's changed in the 10 years since the conference has been running, I think it's a very timely moment to take stock, think about how different things are, think about how jobs exist that didn't exist before, and think about what comes next, really.
Okay, so basically the past 1.5 years changed the perspective from many points of view, or it should have changed our perspective on how open-minded we should be.
Absolutely, and I will give Simon a chance to talk in a minute, but from my point...
You can chat. I know you're good at that.
From my point of view, it's been...
So, guys, the floor will be yours right after a short promo video.
I thought we were live.
You will have all the time allocated for your discussion.
I think we'll just
be
chatting.
Here.
Yeah.
Industry X is about making the current industrial revolution happen and preparing for the future ones. With each of these revolutions, manufacturing becomes safer, more efficient, and more sustainable. As part of the digital manufacturing and operations team, our role is to digitize the entire manufacturing and plant operations. By programming robotics and factory automation, we are boosting safety and productivity. The manufacturing execution systems that we develop offer their users accurate and real-time information based on data stored in the cloud and use AI to help the staff make better decisions. By using water and energy more efficiently, we reduce the factory's carbon footprint. At Industry X, we commit to lead the next wave of transformation for our clients, shifting to more responsible and more sustainable businesses. This is what it's like to work at the heart of change.
Okay, guys, so this was a promotional video from our sponsor. That's it on my side. The floor is yours. Enjoy, and we'll talk afterwards.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for asking me to be here. I think it's really true, the point that you made just before the promo video, that the pandemic has changed everything, is a reminder that while we all have to be prepared to accept change in our working lives and in our general lives, sometimes it can happen a lot more quickly than we expect. I mean, what's your perspective on the last year, Simon?
I mean, we discussed this before. I think obviously it's been a horrific time for a lot of people, but I think it really has kind of pushed the boundaries forwards from what we were before, kind of stuck in offices, stuck on projects which required face-to-face stuff. I think moving forwards, I mean, the opportunities that we get, really broadened. And I mean, from my perspective, employing people, we've now gone from people in just 2 countries to people in like 8 countries, which brings so much extra to a business, and I think that really will benefit developers. And I mean, I'm based in London, so I'm kind of used to a developer getting plus 100k as a starting salary kind of thing. So I mean, a developer in Pakistan does definitely cost a lot less than that, but delivers the same kind of quality. So
I think I'd echo that. I mean, I'm thinking about one of the startups, one of the cryptocurrency startups who I'm working with at the moment. Just for background, I have actually a full-time, a sort of 4 days a week job as a developer and solutions architect, but I spend my other time working with other companies. And this company, exactly as you're describing, is so distributed, and we get so much extra energy from working with people from many different countries, from getting their perspectives of the tech scene within their countries, their different cultural perspectives, and especially from the point of view of cryptocurrency markets in different countries, also a different perspective from that. So it's actually brilliant having a fully distributed team. And I think it's really interesting the way companies have moved so seamlessly towards it. I mean, this particular company that I'm thinking about is a startup, so they've never actually had a physical office. In the natural course of things, they would have established an office, and then people who were working in other countries would have maybe been at a slight disadvantage, because you always feel that if you're not in the room, you're missing discussions. But with a team that's fully distributed, you don't have that, and you're working in a much more productive way. So obviously it's important to remember that the pandemic has been a truly terrible and awful time, but as we've learnt to adapt, there are definitely some positives coming out of it.
Yeah.
And if it means that we're not, you know, sitting in big rooms feeling like we have to be present all the time, and the focus is on what we're delivering rather than the amount of time that we're present, that has to be a good thing.
Do we need to kind of tie in some testing as well? Because I actually, I mean, I work mostly only in blockchain stuff as well, and testing that is notoriously difficult. But like, it's actually, since for employing all these remote people, like, we've really had to kind of up our game on the testing side of things. I don't know. I mean, are people going to ask us questions about this? I'm not really sure. So, yeah.
I think people are definitely going to want to know about testing specifically, and that's something that I don't know. I don't think it's not so much pandemic related, but definitely the role of quality has changed over the last 10 years. I mean, I used to work exclusively, or more or less exclusively, doing test automation for many years. Now I do a much more cross-functional role where I'm primarily developing, but obviously we write unit tests as part of that. But obviously the role of testers has changed, and it's not so much now. If you're hiring a tester, you don't necessarily want somebody who's going to sit there and go through test scripts. Now, I think this is a really good thing, because you're talking about hiring people who think a lot more holistically about quality. And I do think the roles within software teams have changed a lot over the last 10 years as well. And I know that people can sometimes get scared that old ways of doing things are disappearing, but the advantages are that you can bring your skills to these roles where you're still focused on quality, but in a much more meaningful way, whether you're actually called a tester or a testing coach or a DevOps person with responsibility for quality, or you're a product person or whatever. I think it's really interesting. I mean, who does your testing on your team? Do you have a dedicated test team?
No, I mean, the company I work for has got about, I think, 20 people in it now, and there's 6 developers. So we were discussing this today. I mean, we've discussed this before in another call. Like, literally, how do you test a financial transaction is going to end up in the account that it's supposed to end up? That is a really, really big issue that we have. I mean, I rebuilt quite a lot of the platform, and I think, I mean, I'm kind of an anti-tester in some ways, because we had to balance out at the time, like, whether we spend all of our resources and time writing tests for stuff that just really needed to be out in the wild, So now we've got some code that's out there with limited test coverage. Like, who deals with that? Like you said, like we don't necessarily have the scope to get a dedicated tester in to do it. So we all have to kind of share that burden. So like you said, it's actually interesting nowadays that you can't I don't feel like you can necessarily define a role as front end, back end, DevOps, tester. It's like, I mean, it's a startup, so everyone has to get involved as and when they need to. So yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, like we all have to do it, including me. So
yeah, and I think I'm not sure if it's a particularly within cryptocurrency thing or a more general modern applications that depend on network services and have external dependencies, but it's getting harder and harder to test applications that applications are less standalone than they used to be. So it's much more difficult to replicate how something is going to be in the production environment when you're looking at it in either on your local machine or in a staging environment or whatever. I mean, obviously, especially with public blockchains, they bring their own challenges because you can't replicate the state of a live blockchain until you go live. But thinking about even the Fastly outage yesterday, you have to think about how your application functions when some external dependency that you have absolutely no control over suddenly disappears. What's your fallback position? I mean, yesterday, for example, when the Fastly thing happened, I was writing some code to interact with OpenStreetMap, basically just drawing a boundary on a map and then submitting the coordinates and then rendering them out on somewhere else. So I was working on that, and it was actually quite interesting from a testing perspective because I could see that during something where the edge locations go down, bits of things that are cached in different places were still appearing. So I could see tiles on the map were appearing. And that made me think this is a really interesting test case because if you have something like a CDN outage when your site is live, how do you mitigate against that? And if you're thinking about people who are hired to help ensure quality on your team, that's the sort of things that they should be thinking about rather than just testing locally. How does this app gracefully fall back if third-party dependencies go down? I think a testing view needs to be a lot more holistic than it used to be 10 years ago when everything was, you know, in-house on servers that you had control over.
Yeah. I think, I mean, one of the things we did recently that I feel like is such a simple solution was to, so we have to interact with a lot of the other crypto exchanges, and obviously not all of them have got a testing environment. So it's the same kind of idea as a Fastly outage. Like, how are you supposed to test their trends, or you call their API and you get the right response? So for every exchange that we interact with now, we have a private, like, duplicated endpoint for so we'll have a Kraken API within our system that we can test against, and that has really solved a lot of problems recently, until one of them changed the content type that we were allowed to send, and obviously we didn't know that, and then a lot of our transactions started going pretty insane. So that is a difficult one. And actually, I was thinking about you the other day because so obviously there's for Ethereum there are test nets, and we've written a bunch of smart contracts to process inbound money for our customers, and we tested them for like 3 months. Everything was fine, and then we deployed the contracts to mainnet, and everything looked fine. And then we sent a bunch of tether into the contracts, and the tether just disappeared while it's sitting in the contract, and we can't get the tether out of the contract. And 2 weeks later, I find that there's been a bug that was introduced into one of the templates that the tether lot used to create their contract that meant you can't flush a token, or it's like a non-standard token. And I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, if anyone out there wants to find one of these contracts and try and empty it for us, there's a bunch of money sitting in it. But again, like, you can't, how are you supposed to test against other people's bugs that are kind of legacy stuff that have been sitting around for 2 or 3 years or however long it is? I mean,
you see, that's a real case in point. That's exactly the sort of thing I was thinking of, and yeah, I must talk to you afterwards about that.
Like, at the time, like, yeah, I mean, just banging my head against the wall, like, it should be working, and there's nothing. Also, there's no feedback from it. So, I mean, it was just a random article on the internet, but I figured you might have known. So,
yeah, well, that's exactly the sort of thing that you have to ask, if you're in a team, whose responsibility is it to think about all these things that could possibly go wrong. And one thing I know, having been on the testing side of the fence before, is that people complain when testers go into what people call whataboutery, you know, sort of what if this happens, what if that happens. But I think the more of that, the better, because especially when you're working with emerging technologies where nobody has come up against these things before, it's quite difficult to try to imagine what could possibly go wrong. And also, what's a bug? I was talking to some colleagues at work about this the other day, and we were talking about situations where something has been delivered from a development point of view, but so it's been delivered as specified, but the specifications are wrong. We've all seen that. And then people come back and say to the test team, why does this work like this? And say, oh, because that's how it's supposed to work. And you can look at examples of that a lot, especially within the crypto industry, when you have a DeFi smart contract that somebody exploits, and they might not necessarily be exploiting it because it's a bug. It might be that they've spotted that it behaves in a particular way. And so it's not actually a software bug, it's a product bug. I think those circumstances are getting more and more common, and not just in crypto, in life in general. Was thinking the other day about the Microsoft chatbot that was programmed to learn from people on the internet and interact. And then, of course, it went terribly wrong because it started regurgitating a lot of very toxic, offensive content. And people kept talking about, and it was a terrible embarrassment for Microsoft. And people kept talking about the bug that made it do that. But in fact, the chatbot was programmed to behave exactly as it was supposed to from the developer's point of view. It was learning from people on the internet, but people on the internet were toxic and offensive, so it was learning from them. And
I've not heard about that one.
Yeah, it's not a bug. It's not a software bug. It's obviously a product bug. I think the role of people involved in quality, whether they call themselves testers or not, have to accommodate a whole lot more than they used to do, say 10, 15 years ago.
Well, I definitely think the AI side of things is a challenging place. Like, I mean, it's a bit of an unusual conversation starter, but I've got a friend that works for well, one of the big boys. He came to my wedding, and he's definitely a non-functioning human being in terms of he can't buy himself a beer, he won't buy other people a beer, he can't hold a conversation, and his general outlook on life, I mean, his brain's just too big. And yet he's writing all of this complicated AI software for big companies around the world that really, I mean, that's just his opinion, I think, in some ways. And I know there are working bodies to moderate this stuff nowadays, but it's not just about the kind of binary side of things, like, is it a bug, is it a feature, is it working, is it not working? But I feel it's also someone's, as you just said, like, is that actually wrong that the Microsoft chatbot was doing that? It's not wrong at all. I mean, is it right? It's not necessarily not right either. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to go into that, like, get that one sorted out.
As somebody who's responsible directly for hiring, you're a CTO. if you were looking for somebody to work in a role that was very focused on quality, what would the sort of life skills be that you were looking for? And if somebody came to you wanting career advice, somebody who's working in testing exclusively at the moment, what would you say to them about opportunities and the sort of things that you and other people might be looking for in quality specialists?
Oh boy, that's a difficult one. I mean, I'm pretty much exclusive in the startup world all the time, but actually just this year, we've just done a bunch of hires. I hired ourselves like a lead developer, actually in Pakistan. I hired a back-end developer in Turkey. And just as it so happens, I mean, the unfortunate thing is obviously everyone's got to have really good English skills. I mean, I'm embarrassed that it's just English that everyone talks. But I think the thing is that you can't gauge during an interview how these people are going to work or what they're actually going to do. And so it turns out the lead developer that I've hired he's a great guy and does a really good job. But I think actually the Turkish guy that wasn't hired as that has spent so much time communicating and caring about the product. Like he's actually a much better fit for the role. So I guess in the startup world, it's just about communicating, finding your role and communicating what you're enjoying, what you're not enjoying. And it's okay to say, like, I don't want to do that necessarily. I really enjoy working on this. And I find if you put people in doing stuff that they really enjoy working on, they're going to do a much better job. Does that answer your question? I'm kind of mumbling away about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It answers my job. I can see we've got somebody Katie raising her hand. I'm not sure if we're supposed to take questions now or at the end, or what the mechanism is. Katie, how do we get you on stage? Or can you type your question, or do we just ask you to ask it at the end? I'm not sure.
Katie is actually Andre and my coach. I think she might have clicked the raise hand button by mistake. So.
Okay. All right. We'll assume for the moment that maybe Katie doesn't have questions. So,
do other people want to ask us questions? I don't know how many people are out there.
I guess we can always do questions at the end, if not.
I mean, we're going to just kind of muttering on to each other anyway. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I think I want to pick up on the last thing that you said, though, which was that enjoying your job is really important. I do think we've entered quite a different phase in terms of tech over the last 10, maybe 15 years, where people use technology so much more in their personal lives that it becomes very your job and your interests become very, very, very entwined in a way that probably wasn't the case when people were going off to work and at IBM to work on mainframes or whatever. Because lots of people who work in tech also have side hustles, or they're coding for fun or gaming or doing kind of various tech things in their spare time. So this notion of doing a job that you enjoy, I think that's quite a modern concept. I mean, we work for money, but it's always more pleasurable to work with people who enjoy their jobs, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, actually, in the chat with you before this, you said, sorry to quote you on this one, but you said, and I said, I filled my time up before there was crypto in my world. And I think I didn't purposefully end up in the crypto world. It was an accident. Like I offered to help a friend out who runs this company, and for a month to get him back on track. And like a year and a bit later, I'm still in there. And so, I mean, is there something, I'm going to ask you a question back now. Is there something specifically within the crypto, like why you've stayed in there? Like you originally started the kind of Ruby side of things. What is it you love about that specific
That's two questions in one. First of all, I stick with Ruby as a programming language, despite the fact
You're
that
still doing Ruby.
I'm still doing Ruby.
Okay.
I'm part of me has a Ruby on Rails hat on. My I suppose you'd say my primary job, I'm lucky enough to work with our CTO is actually one of the Rails core devs. So I learn a lot from him. Been really lucky to work there. But in terms of crypto, which is an absolute passion of mine, I think the thing that first attracted me to it, really interested in finance and money, always have been since I did my degree. And just the idea that people could transact freely without going through the banking system, and just the ability to not have markets distorted by governments. I think all the social possibilities really excited me. And just once you read the Bitcoin white paper, I don't know, it just blew my mind, the idea that something so simple made up out of existing technologies could be so revolutionary. So obviously I've spent a lot more time than is healthy for me over the last 7 years or so immersed in this space. But it's a really good example of, a technology and an opportunity that didn't exist 10 years ago. I mean, obviously 10 years ago, Bitcoin had only just been invented, but people weren't working professionally in crypto. So the whole cryptocurrency and blockchain space, the huge demand for developers, huge demand for quality people. And I was listening to the imposter syndrome talk before, and I thought that he made so many really good points about it not being really possible to plan your career 10, 20 years ahead, because tech is evolving so quickly that I tend to look at it not so much from the point of view of your skills becoming obsolete, so what am I going to do? But there are all these really exciting opportunities out there that might be more interesting, and how can I move into them? So I think if I was looking for something to involve myself in, I'd be just thinking about the things I enjoy doing in my spare time that involve tech, and thinking, how can I involve myself in this?
Do you think therefore people are put off by the crypto world based on the skills they've got? Do you think they look at it and go, oh, I can't do blockchain development, or I can't write Solidity code or anything like that, and then don't get into it? Or do you think that, I mean, it's obviously as someone that works in it now, it is very transferable to take a skill that you would do, that you learned building a dashboard for some corporation and then move it into the crypto world? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, I think it's really transferable, and I'm going to tell you a hiring story now. One of the startups that I was working with about a year ago, I was just doing little bits and pieces for them, and they asked me to sit in when they were hiring testers, because they didn't have someone on hand with a testing, with much knowledge of testing. And actually the much stronger candidates were people who'd worked in traditional finance, because they understood the principles of markets and they were used to quite complex technologies. Whereas some of the people who were enthusiasts had more ropey skills. I mean, they might have been, in a couple of years, they might have been the better candidate, but at the point they weren't the candidates that these people needed. It's just software, isn't it? I think the real problem with Solidity contracts is, I can't get too specialist because there are probably lots of people listening who aren't terribly interested in it. But the problem with Solidity contracts is that because the language looks easy, people think they are better at it than they necessarily are. And that's why bugs and things happen. There's all these tutorials out there that show you how to put together a smart contract. People follow a couple of those and think that they're a Solidity developer, and I think there's a real problem with that. Sometimes it can look too simple, and it's probably...
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. I mean, that is actually some homework for the people watching this, considering it as a testing conference. It was probably, that was the part that really got me into crypto recently, was discovering that you could write these smart contracts that ran on like this blockchain, but not only could you write the contract and you've got this kind of, was it the Turing code, complete code that you can use, but also you've got like all this test stuff that you can run, like pretty fantastic, essentially just JavaScript tests against all your contracts. That's definitely like a bit of homework just to go and have a play around. And I'm not recruiting just generally on this talk, but like obviously, yeah.
Yes, in fact, I was lucky enough last year to do a workshop where we wrote a templated smart contract. I did it with my friend Sonna, and there might even be people in the chat who came to that workshop last year, and we wrote some tests just to show how easy it was. I think probably the lesson from this is that if you're interested in something, go off and dig into it, because often interest can make you work harder and understand stuff more than something that you force yourself to learn because it's on your learning track at work or you feel like you should.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, my evenings have got shorter at the moment because I can't really stop. Once you get started on it, I find that it just sucks you in. It's quite an interesting, but that goes back to the whole point of work, like making sure that you're actually working on something you're enjoying. I think I saw someone in the chat earlier said that not to kind of benchmark yourself against other people's progress, which I think is actually a very important point. It's very easy to, I mean, certainly when I was starting to write code, like the Facebook developers and all of my friends were going to work at Facebook and Google and all that kind of stuff, and going for the rockstar roles and making sure they got the kind of what they called the rockstar commits, or the ones working on just the important stuff. But actually, like, I mean, my wife's an office manager, and she was talking about this the other day. In the other way, it's like she's just going on leave at the moment, and her company have basically decided not to replace her because she's of no use. But actually, it's the behind the scenes work that people are doing that's far more important than the kind of superficial stuff. So, like, don't be afraid to get involved in some of the the boring tech, as I like to call it. So the stuff that isn't like cutting edge, like it's okay to write like really basic, simple, easy to read code that can actually translate if you're working with a team of people in different countries. Like, it really does need to go back to the simplicity side of things, both from a testing and a code perspective.
I'd completely agree with that. And I'd also encourage people, because I think one of the things that's emerged with testing over the last few years is there's this divide springing up between testers who traditionally haven't necessarily written code and testers who have gone down the test automation path and are now moving more into a sort of developer and test DevOpsy type role. But the thing I'd say to people is that if you don't want to learn to code, it doesn't mean it's second best, because with the disappearance of kind of formal test teams, the need for product people with this great eye for what makes quality and what specifications should be becomes even more important. So I think from a future point of view, if I was sitting, say, in a big company in a traditional testing team looking ahead to the next 10 years, and fine if you're somebody who enjoys coding and you're fine to self-learn. If you're sitting there and you're primarily manually testing, don't be afraid, because the fact that you understand technology in the modern world kind of gives you more or less superpowers, because most people in the outside world don't understand technology at all. And everyone needs really good product people and good business analysts and people who can figure out how a product should work from a spec point of view. That's super important as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think like probably the definition of a tester for me is skewed because I'm a coder at heart. So a tester for me was always someone that just got into the code and wrote the test. So had to be a coder as well as such. And then since I've worked for this crypto company, I've realized that it's so much more than that. And actually, as you just said, like one of the biggest struggles we've got at the moment is quality. So making sure that, I mean, we can test everything, and I can go and make sure everything looks okay, but we need like a product manager to go and test it as well, like the visual side of things and whether it works. And that's getting increasingly more difficult to find that person, because you do need a quite solid technical background. Like, it's okay. I mean, as we've discussed before, like the decimal places for cryptocurrencies is a pain in the neck. So you can't necessarily teach someone to understand that a decimal on a page isn't necessarily in the right place, and one decimal out is wrong these days. That's just kind of a basic understanding of it, or kind of example of it. So yeah, I guess I'd be interested to see how that evolves. Like, do the coders and developers, are they not going to be interested in doing the quality role or the product manager role, or is that something that is probably quite interesting to some people?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's sometimes a little bit of a elitism or mystique on a tech team around, if you can code, somehow that sort of sets you apart. And I don't think that should be the case at all. Everybody thinks about quality in completely different ways, and you need a team with lots of different sorts of people on it. I mean, the stuff that I do a lot for my Rails job, we do a lot of user-centered design and user research. And one of my favorite things is sitting in on sessions with the user researchers to actually see how people use the app and to get to ask them questions. I think from a development and a quality point of view, nothing actually beats observing people watching your application and how they interact with it. That's probably a good thing that's happened over the last 10 years. All this thing with the philosophies of like lean, where you shove a product out and see what happens. But obviously you can't necessarily do that with something like crypto or finance. You can't push something out that might have bugs in it and hope it'll be all right, because people lose their money. So you kind of fall into the niche where you can't really do that.
No, I mean, we have such a thing in the company as a granny test. So would your granny be able to use it? And I mean, we fail most times. But I think the thing that always makes me chuckle, so we have a decent API, and we've got API docs, and they're okay. They're not the best, but they work. And we once a week we'll get someone coming in saying into support, like, I saw the API docs, but could you just explain to me what an API is? And you're sitting there thinking, like, we were discussing this morning, like, why would you want to start messing around with a crypto company's API if you didn't know what it was? So we started writing like a Postman collection that we could put on the website that would allow people to just download it and start playing with it. But again, we don't have a test API, so like, is it a responsible thing for me to do to actually allow people to have this? Because they're going to bang a load of Bitcoin into their system and then lose it probably in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's a real tough one. I don't know, were you at Consensus, the CoinDesk conference? That was really interesting, just to talk crypto testnets for a minute. One of the really interesting social experiments they did at Consensus was they launched their own currency on Rinkeby, which for people listening is one of the Ethereum testnets. So it had no monetary value, but you could swap it for NFTs and swag. And during the course of the conference, in the chat function, just like the one here, everyone became obsessed with when the next desk drop was going to be and in collecting it to put in their wallet and so on. And a whole community sprung up around this testnet currency. And the reason I'm going into this isn't just because it was like a funny anecdote. I mean, now Desk has its own Discord group, its own memes, its own absolutely everything. But it's made me think that from a quality and testing and user research perspective, having a sandbox like that to look at the behavioural aspects of how people interact with technology was actually a super interesting thing, because going back to the specifications aspect of testing and quality, one of the things you want to know is how people interact with your product. And I was thinking that would just be a perfect sandbox to see how people interact with a currency on the test net and all the social behaviours around that before a currency launches on the main net. And
that's interesting, isn't it?
we don't use these sandboxes enough. I don't mean you, I mean collectively we. And although I've used a crypto example, I'm sure there are other examples of where you can use test environment or sandbox technologies to get people in the real world to interact with your product and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone's put a comment in there. I'm assuming that's Elon to the moon. But I mean, Elron to the moon is also so good. I mean, but that's the other thing with it, like people's interaction with a cryptocurrency. Like recently, I mean, it's made my life miserable when Elon goes and makes one comment on the internet because Bitcoin soars or Bitcoin drops, and then people pump money into our system, and then all of the crypto exchanges end up going down. So I mean, that's just one man playing with fire at the moment. But that is the same kind of thing. Like none of these currencies have I mean, Ethereum I think has got value. Like there is, and I think that's to its detriment actually at the moment, that the Ethereum price is going up because it becomes less useful as it gets more expensive. But the rest of them is just why is a Bitcoin worth whatever it is, 32,000 euros at the moment? Like it doesn't make any sense. Like, so are you saying that you think you could possibly gauge based on the testnet interaction how valuable that would be? Or I mean,
Yeah,
I definitely
maybe.
employ you for that if you can get that one going.
Yeah, because that's a perfect example of a third-party dependency. How does your product function when Elon tweets in the middle of the night? You cannot control that. You cannot replicate that in the test net.
No, you can't. Funny. I don't know whether we're getting kicked out at the moment. Have we still got time? What time does it go on to? past?
Andre, are you there? Are we supposed to be doing something, or have we got 5 minutes to continue talking?
Oh, we can carry on chatting.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of an external force, a bit like the Fastly outage. And all the test scripts and test scenarios in the world are not going to prepare you for that.
No. But I mean, when GitHub, for instance, I remember it was a few years ago when it used to go down. It went down for about 6 hours. And people on Hacker News were panicking about it and trying to build up backup plans for it. Like, it's not just about, I mean, Fastly was obviously a major issue, as is something like Cloudflare going down, but you can't really prepare yourself for GitHub going down. I mean, the cost to the industry when that does happen is immense. So
yes. And we haven't even started on open source technologies and what that means for testers. I guess we could talk about that for another half an hour.
Exactly. Next time.
Maybe we can, we can take a slot during the next RTC. It was really nice to hear this conversation with arguments, pros and cons. We still have in the published section of the chat a question, if you guys want to answer it. It's a short Q&A session from Alexandra.
Oh, I can see now. I clicked on Q&A.
Yeah.
Go to published, please.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, we have several questions, I think. Oh, no.
The last three questions are addressed to you guys.
Oh, sorry, everyone. Yeah, we missed those.
Alexandra.
I mean, for me, that Q&A question, as you sorry to just jump in, Rhian. I mean, the biggest issues we face at the moment are human error. Actually, they're not necessarily testing, but they're not necessarily code related. So I don't see how a human could ever just be completely replaced by it. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I'd really agree with that, because even I've looked a little bit at, you know, things like, if you look at things like those visual automation tools that learn and compare, they're really good, but you still need somebody to decide what they need to test. So I think if some of the more repetitious, dull stuff gets replaced, that's maybe a good thing, and it frees people up to work on the more interesting things. I think I agree with you, Simon. No one will ever replace humans when it comes to evaluating how a product should work.
Or is that just what we're saying at the moment because it's going to be 5 years in advance, and essentially that's our job? Like, it's our job to decide on whether there's a decimal place. Like, but I mean, I know there's that frame. I can't remember what it's called. That framework which will write your code for you. And I mean, I saw one the other day that would even create the Postgres tables for you as well, based on an input. So I wonder how far that can go. So I mean, at the end of the day, there is actually a right or a wrong, and that can be I guess that can be decided on, can't it? So is the page in the right place? Is the number there? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe things that have a binary right or wrong, true or false value can be entirely automated away with new tools, but things where you have to evaluate the quality of something remains a human characteristic, or maybe even that changes. I don't know. It's such an interesting question, though.
Well, I mean, at some point we're going to have to write ourselves out of this simulation that we're all sitting in anyway. So, yeah, sorry that we missed all those questions. I mean, yeah, newbie
I think
alert
some
on
of
that
them
one.
are from earlier. I'm reading through. I think these are from earlier sessions. I think it's only Alexandra's question.
Yeah, if there are any left questions, you can pick them up and answer via our Slack channel. Okay. So thank you guys so much. We ran out of time for this discussion. It was very interesting, and we really appreciate that you accepted our invitation to join us in the special anniversary edition of RTC.
A privilege.
Hope to see you soon, face to face.
See you later, people. Bye, all. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Guys, we will remain around. We are approaching the end of the first day of RTC 2021, but we still have some things to talk about. So please stay with us, and we will be right back after a short 15 minutes break. See you soon.